Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Top of the morning to you. Phone lines are open. I shall defy convention a little and remind you of the number right from the top this morning because, well, you know about as much of this judgment as I do. I'm going to have to level with you. I haven't yet read the 73 pages in complete isolation, given that they were only issued about 20 minutes ago. But we'll make sense of what we do know. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. Now, I mean, here's the thing. If I tell you a little secret, do you promise you won't tell anyone important? Professionally speaking, this is quite close to suicidal. It's 2 days running now where I thought that the biggest story in town was actually not that big a deal. The Trident story yesterday struck me as a little, well, an awful lot of fuss about not actually that much exciting news. And what's happened today isn't really going to change anything. I don't think it is. Possibly this devolution, the devolved parliament angle of it might, but I don't think so. I don't think so. I guess it makes a second independence referendum in Scotland even more likely than it was already, but hey, there's a party in government in Scotland that's raison d'etre is independence, so the idea that that was going to be off the table for any appreciable amount of time is palpably laughable. You shouldn't be angry if you're... I mean, that's the problem, isn't it, with a lot of the sort of Brexiter constituency is you don't really understand why you shouldn't be angry. You probably think someone like me is going to start gloating over this. So poor is your grasp of facts and simple principles like parliamentary sovereignty, democracy, rule of law, the role of the judiciary in a three-pronged state. Do you know Parliament isn't even sovereign? The amount of ignorance surrounding this issue is quite breathtaking. All you have to do is read stuff. Very few people are going to know it already. The people are not sovereign. The monarch is sovereign, you know. The monarch is sovereign in our parliamentary democracy, and ultimate political power in our representative democracy is exercised by the Crown in Parliament. That's why you get a Queen's speech at the beginning of a government's term. They set out, she sets out, he sets out the agenda that the government will follow under parliamentary, or beg your pardon, under monarchic sovereignty. But anyway, these are all boring details for the purposes of today. If you think I'm wrong and there is lots of stuff to be angry about, go on, give us a ring. We can have a laugh. 0345 6060973. But do you know what I think the most interesting element of this is I've been thinking about this since Tristram Hunt announced his resignation as an MP, because he, of course, would have found himself in the position of having to vote when the vote is put before Parliament on triggering Article 50. He would have to vote either according to his conscience and intelligence and knowledge, or according to the referendum result in his constituency, which was in Stoke-on-Trent fairly strong leave. I don't know what the numbers would be like if they redid the referendum now, but it doesn't matter, does it? He would have to. And this is the fascinating thing. And this is where my politics A-level comes to unexpected aid. This is the fascinating thing, all right? We do not send delegates to the House of Commons. We send representatives. Our representatives are there to exercise their judgment in the service of their constituents. So they are, and it's almost paternalistic in its essence, this system, because they are supposed to do what is best for, quotes, us, end quotes, regardless of what we think they should do. Once they're in, they are there to exercise their judgment, not to enact the will of their constituents. And every single MP, I think, every single MP that got elected in the last general election, every single Conservative was elected on a manifesto that contained a commitment to stay in the single market, for example. The Labour Party was elected on a manifesto that promised to campaign to remain in the European Union, for example. The Liberal Democrats even more so. So pretty much, with the exception of what's his name? The funny-looking fella in Clacton. Carswell. With the exception of Carswell, I think every single MP in the House of Commons would have been elected on a party manifesto that pledged to stay in the European Union. Certainly the SNP did, and certainly I think Plaid Cymru probably did as well. I don't even know if they've got any MPs. So there's the thing. And yet you can't argue with the very close win in the referendum result for the Leave side. Now, this means, and this is, I mean, so interesting to me, this means that we are effectively now asking our MPs to go against what they consider to be in the best interest of their constituents. I can't think of a more profound subversion of what parliamentary democracy is supposed to represent than that. It's this messy, clumsy, stupid plebiscite. The way it was framed. How would you have framed the question? Now, 2020 hindsight, I'd have just done a referendum on whether or not you'd rather be poorer if it meant there might be fewer immigrants around. That's what it's all boiled down to. That is it. All this talk about sovereignty and accountability. This whole case proves none of the people banging on about sovereignty or control understood what they were talking about. The rule of law. I wonder, ironically, whether or not the government will now send this to the European Court of Justice in the hope of a final appeal. It doesn't need to, but it just goes to show how much ignorance and deception has surrounded this whole issue. Parliament must be sovereign. Well, all right, here's a way that we can ensure Parliament gets to vote on something as important as Article... Oh, I don't want Parliament to vote on it. OK, well, let's go to judges, because that is how our system works. And they can then decide on what a government can and can't do, because governments would like nothing more than to ride roughshod over an elected chamber. Oh, no, we can't go to judges. They're enemies of the people. All right, so even the Prime Minister voted to remain in the European Union. So apart from individual declarations of independence, every single manifesto flies in the face of what we're now demanding MPs do. And I want to know what you'd do. I want to know what you'd do. I hope we can avoid sort of the lazier name calling. If you want to do a little bit of that, that's fine. But in terms of the combination or the confrontation between political expediency and principle, what would you do? I'll use myself as an example here. I am across as much information as humanly possible to be across. Three Plaid Cymru MPs in the House of Commons. Thank you, Mark. And it is, I mean, it's possible that in about 15 years' time, we'll look back and say, yeah, things are pretty much as good as, or not quite as good as they would have been if we'd stayed in the European Union. It's possible that pulling out of the biggest single market, the biggest free market in the world, may not prove to be an economic disaster. It's possible. All of these things are possible. But I'm very much of the view that we've shot ourselves in the foot. You know that I am, that we've punched ourselves in the face. And unless you really are happy to be poorer in the hope of seeing a fewer foreigners around the place, then you're probably on the same page as me now. But democracy is a multifaceted creature. And the result of this referendum is clear and very, very close. And of course, lots of people on the Leave side said that if it was as close as 52-48, then there'd be a very clear mandate for another referendum. They, of course, because they're mostly liars and dissemblers, they never mention that again now. But what do you want MPs to do? To do what they were elected to do? Or to do what a largely ill-informed plebiscite has somehow demanded that they do? And if you think that I'm being rude by saying ill-informed, the Daily Mail put judges on the front page and called them enemies of the people, in full knowledge that not only were they wrong and deeply, deeply irresponsible when they did that, but much more importantly, in full knowledge that it would prompt cheering and celebrations in the constituencies, the corners of the country they were addressing directly. So what you have to do is this is why Tristram Hunt resigned, isn't it? He, in many quarters, was considered to be a future leader of the Labour Party, but this is a genuine crisis of conscience. Does he walk into the chamber and go against every instinct that brought him into politics in the first place? Whether you agree with him or disagree with him, what brought him into politics was a desire to act in the best interests of his constituents. And his constituents have, in his mind and in my mind, punched themselves in the face. So what do you do as an MP? Do you punch them again? Or do you try and hold their hand and stop them from punching themselves in the face again? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. That is the absolute crux of this at the moment. We'll move on to lots of the other elements and lots of the other considerations. But in terms of what I find personally most interesting, it's that you have a significant majority of MPs who believe that the country voted to punch herself in the face last June. All right, that's a matter of fact. You might not agree with them, but they are a majority. You have with the exception of Douglas Carswell, you have a House of Commons that is rammed to the rafters with people who fought on a manifesto, either committing to stay in the European Union or, in the case of the Conservatives, committing to stay in the single market. That's what they were elected on. That's their mandate. That's their ticket into Westminster. And now they are being ordered by some to ignore that centuries-old tradition and actually vote in a way that they believe will harm their constituents. And I think they're going to have to, because this is why, even though they won, the Leave side has worked so hard to keep everything so toxic and hate-filled, because you can't really pull the wool over people's eyes when they're calm. They need to be furious. Just look at America. Just look at Donald Trump. You can't pull the wool over the eyes of someone who is smoothly contemplating and considering things. You can only really pull the wool over the eyes of someone who's too furious, spluttering and screaming that they didn't even notice you pulled the wool out of your pocket. So that's why, oddly, the people that won have behaved with considerably less grace and decorum than the people that lost. There's only one thing worse, of course, than a bad loser, and that's a bad winner. But if you want to understand why the media and the usual suspects have been so keen to keep stoking the fires of fury, enemies of the people, subverting democracy, why would you do that? You've already won. The answer is really, really simple. You can't keep the con up unless everybody's furious. Calm people don't vote against their own interests. Only angry people do that. Look at America. So now what do the MPs do? I've got to tell you, I think any MP possessed of an ounce of principle will vote according to whatever he or she believed before the referendum unfolded, because that's what they were elected to do. And yet, of course, if it had gone the other way, you wouldn't have a dilemma, because the MPs would be in full agreement with the country. This is really interesting. I hope I've managed to communicate to you why I find this angle more interesting than some of the others. I've just had a statement from Downing Street. The British people voted to leave. Well, that's not true, is it? Some British people voted to leave. But again, you've got to use this language. Theresa May's part of it. She has to keep this kind of rhetoric of 1950s Little England. She has to keep it afloat. She has to keep it alive, because it's the only fuel on the whole ship. The only fuel is this Little England of fury. All the talk about economics, all the talk about sovereignty, all the talk about what else were they talking about? Control. We had control. You know, I showed you that last week. The treaty's there. 3 months. You haven't proved you've got the money or a job or a place to study. We could legally have removed you from this. It was always there. It was all there. It's sort of like a right-wing coup, which I think is probably designed ultimately to compromise workers' rights, make life a lot easier for business, and probably also, in the final analysis, soften up the NHS for even more privatisation. So you can't do it. You can't pull the wool over people's eyes if people are calm. What do you think the MPs should do? 0345 6060 973. Do you see why, even if you are sort of, forgive me for rudeness, but even if you are one of these chuntering, furious people, do you see why the ultimate subversion of parliamentary democracy comes when you order an MP to vote for what he or she believes will harm his constituents? That's what we've done, guys. Great work. We've created a country now where people bleating ignorantly about democracy, sovereignty and parliamentary democracy have created a landscape in which we are going to ask our elected representatives to vote for something that they believe will hurt their constituents. And if they don't, they'll be crucified. Do you know why fake news hasn't caused quite the stir in Britain that it has in America? Do you know why? Because our newspapers were already halfway there. There wasn't a sort of objective litmus that could be veered from by fake news, because our newspapers, look at the front of the Express most mornings, our newspapers are making it up already. And they'll make this up. You vote, if you as an MP now vote in what you believe to be the best interests of your constituents, just think about this. If you as an MP now vote for what you believe to be the best interests of your constituents, you are going to get crucified by the Daily Mail. I'm not literally crucified, But sticking pictures and phrases like enemies of the people for unelected judges in an independent judiciary will be as nothing to what they do to MPs. And remember what page they put the conviction of the racist murderer that killed Joe Cox on. That was on page 30. They want to start going after other elected MPs for daring to vote in a way that they believe is in their own constituents' best interests. That'll be on page 1. Just watch. It's 10:18. What do you actually care about? Democracy? Sovereignty? Parliamentary representation? Honesty? Decency? Truth? Because we are now effectively poised to order MPs to vote in a way that they believe will harm their constituents, which makes a mockery of every definition of democracy going. But that is what happens when you have a ludicrously simplistic plebiscite. David is in Wrexham. David, what should the MPs do? But should they do what they promised to do in their manifestos, what they were elected to do, or something else?
I'm all for going through Parliament, and I'm all for people scrutiny. But one thing that kind of worries me is I was watching TV this morning, and there was a guy, you probably know better than I do. His first name was Tom, and he's a Liberal Democrat. And his constituency voted to leave the EU. But he said that he's actually going to vote to stay in the EU and oppose the people that he represents. Now, I kind of worry that this isn't democracy, because Parliament should really be...
but he was elected on a manifesto that committed to EU membership.
He wasn't. He
in an election, in the process, the democratic process that actually peoples our parliament. As a Liberal Democrat, his manifesto pledged to continue as a member of the European Union.
You see, here I start to disagree, because I start.
You can't disagree with what I just said.
I can disagree with the fact that this guy should be representing the people, and by actually going in there, the only person that he's
Tom Brake, I think you're talking about. Tom Brake, just for the record.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
And the only person that he can actually sort of represent in this case is himself in that. And to me, that's taken away. Like, why did I vote? Why did somebody turn around to me, give me a vote? And I knew what I was voting for, because when they said we were going to leave...
Well, I can only answer that in very rude terms.
You've been rude so far. So
I may as well double down on it. The reason why you got to vote is because none of those clowns like Cameron believed that the country would be stupid enough to do this.
Well, there you go. But to actually turn around to people like myself and say, we didn't... I've been called a builder, and this is nothing against builders, but somebody actually assumed I was a builder because I voted to leave the EU.
There's plenty of people who voted to leave the European Union who don't deserve any of these derogatory descriptions,
exactly.
But not a majority. And unfortunately, there's no way you would have got over the line without the people who do deserve these derogatory descriptions.
No, just supposing, if I were a question at you, just supposing we have a vote in 2 years' time or whatever, right? Another vote.
Yes.
Well, what kind of worries me is the fact that every second now there's people who become eligible from Europe to vote. Yes.
No, none of them. Oh, you mean in an election or in another referendum?
Well, in a referendum.
No, they were all excluded from voting.
Yeah, but if you're a British citizen, you get the right to vote.
Oh, if they're British citizens, yes, of course they do.
Yeah,
But that's good, isn't it?
Every day there's more and more people becoming British citizens and that from the EU.
How many a day?
But the next vote, well, you tell me, but...
well, I'm not worried about it, so you need to tell me.
Well, okay, I am worried about it, because I worry...
So how many are there?
Well, I don't know offhand, but I would
Right,
assume...
but you're really worried about them.
But I assume that most of the people who are actually coming here are applying for, talking to friends and things, most of them are applying for British citizenship. So the next time...
No, they're categorically not.
Well,
The majority of European Union workers, I mean, you've read all the stories about people who've been here for 30 years and haven't got British citizenship, and they're worried about what their status will be. But until we get the numbers, we can't decide whether or not you're right to be so worried. Let me just ask you this: if I just say to you, and very simply, why is it a good idea to ask that MP that you've mentioned, Tom Brake, or any other actually, any Conservative who campaigned to stay? Did you vote to leave the single market?
Yes.
You did. So how did you vote in the general election?
In the general election, what, you really want to know?
Yeah, of course.
Well, Okay, well, in the general election just gone, I voted for the first time Conservative.
Right, and they had a manifesto pledge in black and white that they would stay in the single market whatever the referendum result was.
Well, but we also had a vote for the referendum, and I believe...
But why is one vote bigger than the other? I mean, just in terms of you didn't know you were going to have to leave the single market because all of the people on your side told you that you wouldn't have to.
Okay, well, because when you have a general election and everything, you vote for, there are many things, and you vote for some things, you elect a party where you don't agree with everything. But when I did...
But membership of the single market was a pretty big thing.
But when I actually voted to leave the EU, that was a specific thing, to leave everything, lock, stock and barrel, to get out of there, just to wade the anchor and just move on.
Even though all the prominent Leave campaigners said we'd be able to stay in the single market.
No, they didn't actually.
No, don't make me play the tape.
No. I was talking to I was watching a lady this morning, and she specifically was on about, and I know this for a fact because I watched the campaign and everything, and they said that they were going to control immigration. They were going to do this, that, and the other.
And you know they could already do that. That was already in the treaty.
No, they couldn't.
Okay.
Because we just take immigration.
I'm going to run out of time. In a nutshell. Okay. Hang on. I just want you to answer this question. In a nutshell, why do you want an MP like Tom Brake to vote for what he believes will harm his constituents? Because
true democracy is to represent the will of the people.
No, you see, the will of the people is an utterly meaningless phrase in this context. The will of the people. What if the people want to jump off a cliff? Is his job to encourage them or to stop them?
You're not democratic then, because you don't believe in the will.
No, but you voted for a party that pledged in its manifesto to stay in the single market. Everyone's pretending now they knew they were going to have to leave, but that's just doubling down on the original lie. Quite bizarre. David Green is the lawyer for the less known claimant in this case. Dia dos Santos is his client's name. I'd like to ask you quite a few questions, David, but in the great scheme of things, what happened today, what happened this morning is not, forgive my sort of slang, it's not that big a deal, is it?
Well, I mean, I think it's a big deal, as in this is a substantial constitutional point. And the court has determined that constitutional point.
But it's not going to change anything substantive.
Well, it has already changed things in that this case. One can speculate, but yes. One wonders whether, in fact, Theresa May would have consulted with Parliament at all had it not been for this case. And now she will have to.
But she'd already said before this morning. But she had already said that she was going to do that. I'm not attempting to make light of the sort of constitutional significance of it. I'm just attempting to dilute any fears that this is going to alter the course of Brexit through Parliament or indeed beyond. Why has sorry, go on.
All the court has done is said this is something that Parliament needs to deal with. They have the right to determine these rights and to remove rights, and it's from Parliament. And in a way, it's here I'm at the Supreme Court standing outside, and it's passing from this building over to Parliament now. And it's entirely up to Parliament how they deal with it, whether it's a one-line bill or something more.
Were you surprised that the government? Were you surprised the government fought this case, given that I mean, to almost every informed opinion, it was fairly obvious which way it was going to go?
Surprised in a way, not. I think they felt that they had to determine the issue, and it is now determined. So I'm not sure we were surprised that they fought it all the way. I mean, it was their decision to appeal, so they brought it to the Supreme Court. That was their decision.
And finally, Gina Miller's name has obviously become synonymous with this case. Your client appears to have stepped away from the public eye. Is that a conscious decision? Has he been slightly surprised?
No, it's absolutely a conscious decision that he decided that he didn't want to be the subject of the emails and the hate mails that have come out of this, and kept a low profile. And I have to say, I think that was a very wise decision in the circumstances.
Given some of what has happened to Gina Miller, but it subverts a democratic principle, doesn't it? If he's been frightened into silence, having brought a court case and exercised his right as a citizen.
we talk about the constitutional issues here, but I mean, there is an issue about access to the court and being able to bring this in front of the court. And when we get judges referred to as enemies of the people, something's gone slightly wrong, that these are not enemies of the people, they're actually the guardians of the people. And once we start down that line, I think that's a very dangerous line. What we've now had is a proper process. We've come to a conclusion and a decision has been made. And it's now for Parliament to take that on and decide what they want to do in relation to Brexit.
Indeed it is. Well, except it isn't. It's not for them to decide what they want to do, is it? According to all of the people that have been responsible for terrifying or terrorising your client into silence and hiding, all of the people who are on that side of the argument have, of course, no desire at all for Parliament to consider what it wants to do. They just want them to blindly follow an essentially absurdly simplistic plebiscite. Nobody voted to leave the single market, not one person, because no one asked them if they wanted to. And it all hinges on whether or not you understand the difference between, whether or not we understand the difference between a delegate and a representative. I remember Father Francis explaining it to us when I was doing my politics A-level at school. And the Trades Union Congress is delegates. So the people that turn up at the TUC with their support from their membership, they are only allowed to do what has been previously agreed with the membership. So they are delegates. They are essentially mouthpieces. Loudspeakers, if you will, for the desires of a majority of the membership. Representatives are different. Representatives are elected, usually on a manifesto, and on the proviso that they will then exercise their wit and judgment to do what they consider to be best for the constituency. It's not a perfect system. It's pretty much the best available until people start trying to undermine it. And that is where we found ourselves, quite bizarrely. A referendum fought on issues like democracy and sovereignty, often with slightly skewed and deliberately misleading definitions of those words. Successful, though, has ended up putting us in a position where we are being asked, or pretty much we're demanding, that parliamentarians subvert representative democracy. That is not an opinion. You might not like it, but it's a fact. We are now in a position where the sort of massed ranks of the usual suspects politically and the epic newspaper lobby, which is almost exclusively owned now by billionaires who want to leave the European Union, you have to ask yourself why. They are now going to demand that parliamentarians subvert the most fundamental foundation stone of parliamentary democracy. They're going to demand that MPs vote against what they consider to be their constituents' best interests. And yeah, okay, you can talk all you want about the will of the people, but that's not what we have in this country. We have a parliamentary democracy, and it is not in any way proven that the will of the people is to leave the single market or to leave a customs union or to join a customs union or to put into doubt the residency status of people that have lived here in some cases for decades. You want to do a trade deal with the European Union? Guess who's going to be in charge of deciding whether or not you've obeyed the rules of that trade deal? The European Court of Justice. But they've told us we're pulling out of that as well. You can't pull out of that if you want to do a deal with them. There's no will of the people here. There's just a sort of vague, abstract, jingoistic sense that we're better off out. And yet MPs believe that we're not. They believe that we're worse off out, and we're ordering them, essentially, to punch us. Weird, isn't it? Phil's in Westminster. Phil, what would you like to say? Alex is in Brentwood. Alex, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi there. Morning, James. I've been listening to your programme, and a slight wry smile on my face sort of confirms the complete shambles that I think we've managed to crawl in.
Absolutely.
Cameron, even though he might have thought that no one would be so stupid to vote out by putting a referendum to the people.
I shouldn't really even use the word stupid in that context. I'm happy to cause upset and when it's deserved, but I guess what I'm saying is that's what he thought. He thought that people wouldn't be stupid.
Excuse me for paraphrasing you incorrectly there. No. I mean, if you put a vote to the people, you automatically accept that the outcome that you didn't expect may actually happen. Sadly, it just came to be by such vitriol and such, mudslinging, that anything that we now have to dig ourselves out of hence the situation in the Supreme Court versus those in Parliament.
What would you do? Well, as an MP, imagine you came from a constituency and let's say you were a Labour MP and you were pro-EU, you'd campaigned on that, it was in your manifesto, you got elected, and then you returned, say, a 65% leave mandate. This is the position Tristram Hunt found himself in, and he walked the plank. What would you do?
I think you've only got two options. I guess one either does a Tristram Hunt, or one says, actually, you guys didn't vote for me on that, and you do trigger a by-election, or you, like you said, you vote against your constituency.
I vote to harm my constituents, and if I don't, the Daily Mail will kill me.
Well,
it's incredible, isn't it?
It's silly. Like you said earlier, either we need people of serious integrity, and then they just have to go, you know what, I'll take the flak. And I draw my hat to those people.
Except that they'll be out of the game altogether, probably.
Yep.
What an absolute mess we've made of everything. What a stupid decision it was. And do you know what? People like you and me just sound a little bit discombobulated and dismayed. The people on the winning side are furious. It's just the strangest, most surreal period in British political history. You won.
Well, I don't understand why people are angry.
Well, I think it's because they have to be. They have to stay angry, because if they calm down, the scales will fall from their eyes and they'll start going after the people who have conned them instead of going after, which is obviously proving it to be a very lucrative career period for me, instead of going after the people who are proving that they've done something silly, proving that they've been conned, in my case, on a daily basis. Max is in Bracknell. Max, what's going on?
I just want to make it clear that I'm one of the few people that did vote to leave, knowing we'll leave the single market, because if you have an ounce of intelligence, you'd look at how the EU works, and you cannot be in it without leaving the single market. But anyway...
Customs union?
Also,
did you vote to leave a customs union?
I didn't know about that, so that's what
Did you vote to put the residency status of every EU citizen in this country still in doubt, still not clear where their future lies? Did you vote for that?
Well, that was obvious when you vote for it, so I didn't vote in favour.
So you did vote for that?
That was going to happen. Yeah, I knew it was going to happen.
Okay. That's nice.
My point. Yeah, it's what I wanted to vote for is leaving the EU, and obviously that naturally it puts British citizens abroad at stake as well. But anyway, what I was going to say was, in terms of the constituency, if you have an elected MP, now you elected in the 2015 general election, and every party they were going to stay in the single market, and I understand that. But then in 2016 made a referendum to leave the EU. Now, if your constituency votes to leave the EU, you should represent the constituency's vote. And it's your opinion.
The referendum is designed deliberately to be independent of the parliamentary mandate. Otherwise, they just have had a vote in Parliament.
I understand it, but what I'm trying to say is, when you said before that if their party policy is to remain in the single market...
Which got them elected into Parliament. That's why they're in Parliament. They're in Parliament to deliver manifesto promises.
Absolutely, but what I'm trying to say is, like, for example, Labour were elected in Stoke-on-Trent Central. I know it's up for by-election now, but the actual constituency is 70% Leave. The point is, if you're going to be elected to represent a body of people, and then you're going to vote for that body of people in Parliament, because that's what you're voting for. You're not voting for yourself, you're voting for that constituency. That's what your vote counts for in Parliament.
You're voting for what you consider to be in their best interest. That is the most fundamental tenet of parliamentary representation. Whether you like it or not, that's what you elected them to do, to vote for what they consider to be best for their constituents. So let's play a little game. Just forget Brexit, right, Max?
Yeah.
Forget Brexit. Imagine an MP in a dock, in a court of law, right?
Yeah.
And now imagine a lawyer saying to that MP, do you mean to tell the court that you voted in this way believing that it would be disastrous for your constituents? And the MP replies, yes, I did. That's what we've created.
I understand where you're coming from, but it's not the point. The point is...
Oh, it is the point.
But if a number of people want to do something, who is one person to say, no, do you know what, you're all wrong?
He's the elected representative. That is, as I said, you might not like it, but these are constitutional facts. You want a world in which an MP in the dock, when asked whether he deliberately voted in a way that he believed would harm his constituents, you want him not only to say yes, but to get applauded for saying yes.
Yes, at the end of the day, let's just hope they do the right thing, and hopefully we...
Let's just hope that... You hear what you just said there, Max? Let's just hope they do the right thing and vote in a way that they think will harm the country. How did you end up being this bloke?
How did I end up being this bloke? I did politics at college and university, so I know about politics, and I don't like the EU as a body.
No, that's fine. How did you end up being the bloke who wants an MP to vote in a way that he believes will harm the country and will be cross if he doesn't?
Because it's only their opinion. There's no facts that they will harm.
And that is, as you learnt at college, what parliamentary democracy hinges upon, the exercise of wit and wisdom in service of constituents who voted to be represented by that person. And you want that person to vote in a way that will hurt this country, in their opinion. That's fine, as long as you understand exactly what you've become. We've solved some mysteries. Why are people on the winning side of the referendum still so blooming furious? Answer is they have to be kept furious, otherwise they might notice that the wool has been pulled over their eyes. So today, another invitation to be furious, subverting the will of the people. But what have we actually created? We've created a country now, a combination of billionaire backers, of politicians and newspaper owners have created a country now in which Parliament has just been broken. Not by the Supreme Court ruling. The Supreme Court ruling today somewhat naively reinforces parliamentary democracy. But the media has already broken it. The media tried to break the independence of the judiciary. You know, you sit here sometimes and you think, maybe things aren't that bad. And then you just glance over the Atlantic and see people on both sides of the pond still cheering what's going on there. You have a full-on fascist takeover underway in America. God only knows how it's going to end. But then you come back here and you see the best-selling newspapers in the country essentially trying to undermine the independence of the judiciary by calling the judges, not the judgment, but the actual judges, enemies of the people. Three prongs to government: as the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative. The legislative is the parliament, the judiciary is the judges, and the executive is the government. And they act as a sort of check and balance on each other. So if the executive, the government, tries to ride roughshod over the legislature, the parliament, then the judiciary comes in and says, you can't, that's against the law. It's beautiful. Read Walter Bagehot. It's beautiful, our democracy. Well, it was. The media has never been part of that. But when they say the fourth estate, that's kind of what they mean. It's the fourth part of it. And the media is supposed to hold all three of those to account. In Britain in the 21st century, it does the precise opposite. Most of the media in this country now works quite deliberately and quite definitively to pursue the interests of its owners rather than the interests of its readers or its consumers. Why is Brexit good for Rupert Murdoch? Well, he denies saying this now, but it was the city editor of the Evening Standard who reported that when I go to Downing Street, they do what I say. When I go to Brussels, nobody takes any notice. So we don't have media checks and balances, just a few little gobs on sticks like me, but 80-odd% of the newspaper world was pro-leave. So you have the judiciary keeping an eye on the executive, and when they do that, what do the newspapers do? They call them enemies of the people. They print stories about the sexuality of the judges, even the dress code, even the choice of tie by the judges, just literally painting targets on their backsides. That's why they had to put the Joe Cox verdict on page 30, because they could. What else could they do in the Mail? What else could they do? They couldn't put it on the front page and say, who radicalised him? Where on earth did somebody get the idea that immigration was such a big problem it's worth killing an MP? They can't do that. What can they put on the front page? An invitation to you and to me to hate judges for exercising their objective opinion. I'm not exaggerating, am I? You see, you just pull back that one layer of wool. This is what you get. The blokes that own the Ritz Hotel somehow harnessing anti-establishment feeling to get the British people to punch themselves in the face. So what have we got left? Because we know the executive has sold its soul. Chancellor and the Prime Minister, both pro-Remain, both too terrified of the media, the fourth estate, to act according to their consciences. I've still got a little bit of hope for Hammond. But Theresa May's gone all in. She's gone all in. Utterly against her own beliefs and interests. And now she's demanding that Parliament does the same. So who's left? Where's the check and balance now? Media every day telling us to punch ourselves in the face. Judiciary doing its job rightly and accurately, but getting treated in such a way that it would have put many prominent professional lawyers off becoming judges. You don't want this on. It's not what you signed up for. Enemies of the people. That's Nazi propaganda. Enemies of the people. So the judiciary has been compromised by these clowns. The executive has been bought by these clowns. What have we got left? The legislative, Parliament. Parliament is the only place left where you are allowed to act according to your conscience. But they're not, are they? Because if they do, they'll have a target painted on their backside. So all four strands of government, all four strands of statehood, utterly compromised. The fourth estate, just doing the bidding of its billionaire owners. Judiciary, still doing its job, but being lampooned and pilloried and insulted in quite spectacular fashion. You just heard the lawyer for one of the claimants in this case describing the death threats or the hatred that had prompted his client to go essentially into hiding. Great for freedom and democracy and taking back control. People trying to go to the law being bullied into hiding. So that's gone. Judiciary's compromised. Executive sold out. Legislative's next. It's not complicated, is it, when you see it like that? So what are we going to tell the legislative that they have to do? Well, don't do what you think is right. Do what you think is wrong. And that's it. That's democracy finished. In many ways. It's Britain. We'll pull through. We'll come out the other side. We'll laugh about it one day. But you are telling Parliament today, telling MPs, do the opposite of what you think is right. Do what you think is wrong, or else. And suddenly the decision of someone like Tristram Hunt, not by any stretch of the imagination an MP who'd covered himself in glory, in my humble opinion. All right, I'm not going to get away with that. In my opinion. What choice did he have? He's a historian. He really understands the Constitution. He really understands the history of democracy. He really understands the struggle that has brought us to the place where we are now. And he really understands how the media works, because he used to be a TV presenter. So there you have it. That is why he's gone. Because he knows that he either votes for something he believes to be bad for his constituents and his country, or he gets crucified by the Daily Mail and the Sun. But we've got our country back. But we've taken back control. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. Sorry, I didn't realise I was going to top and tail this hour, but these are momentous times that we're living in. Truly momentous. Judges compromised, threatened, bullied. Executive on the record describing the economic disaster that leaving the European Union will be, but she's in Downing Street and she's gone doubling down on the empty, meaningless rhetoric that has swept through the country in the last 18 months. Who's going to actually stand up to this juggernaut of self-destruction? Answer, nobody. Absolutely nobody. And still people will talk about the will of the people without being able to establish on any level whether or not it is the will of the people to leave the single market, whether it is the will of the people to leave a customs union, to leave the European Court of Justice, or indeed to cut ourselves loose from the biggest free market in the world at a time when probably the second biggest, America, is determined to batten down the hatches and start looking after itself at the expense of other countries like us. More calls this hour, I promise, although I've still got lots to get off my chest, including what happens if the Labour Party somehow manage to get their act together and do attempt to send Theresa May away with her tail between her legs in the event that she comes back from Brussels with a really, really rubbish deal, which she will. Then do we have to vote it through? Or will there be riots in the street? Will there be enemies of the people? Will there be public stonings of MPs who dared to suggest it would be really stupid to vote for this? This is demonstrably bad. This is the actual deal. It's so much worse than what we already had. It's the will of the people. It's not the will of Scottish people. It's not the will of London people, the financial engine room that keeps the rest of the country afloat. Shut up! I'm just wondering, at what point do we realise it's probably a mistake to order MPs to vote for what they consider to be a disaster? Vote against the interests of your constituents or else. That's what we've done. Make no mistake. Stephen's in Leicester. Stephen, what would you like to say? Big Leave City, Leicester.
Hi, James. Yeah, it is. I'm not a Leaver, unfortunately.
What do you mean, unfortunately?
Well, I should be, shouldn't I?
Oh, I see, just geographically. No, not at all. I think that's the whole point. There is no homogenous block. That's why phrases like the will of the people are so meaningless. But what made you pick up the phone? What do you want to say?
I'm so frustrated by all of it. I think it's just a lose-lose situation. Because the MPs who are voting on Article 50, theoretically they could vote not to leave the European Union, but they can't do that. There'll be riots, people will be angry, and so that's why I think it's a lose-lose situation. If they vote to leave and we end up leaving,
we've broken, hopefully temporarily, we've broken everything that is fundamental to parliamentary democracy. We've created a situation, and it's partly a result of the vote, but it's mostly the result of the decision to have the vote in the first place, just in a pathetic attempt to sort of close down the more racist fringes of the Conservative Party. David Cameron has handed the country to precisely those racist fringes of the Conservative Party. And very, very simply, we are now in a situation where if you don't do what you think is bad for your constituents, we'll come after you. And people are celebrating. That's the point. And you can have a crack at this, and then I'll try it with some other people, because we tried it with Trump last week. What are we celebrating? What are we supposed to be celebrating? Getting our country back? Taking back control? Give me something meaningful.
I can't. I really don't know. No, it's frustrating that people don't seem to get what you're saying, that, that the MPs are not there to do your will. They're there to do what they think is best. But I'm not sure what we've achieved over the last few months.
No, well, nor do I, but I don't think you're going to get much help from me. Or indeed, am I going to get much help from you? 0345 6060 973. I'm just looking at a Sun editorial from the 9th of October 2016. If the EU forced us out of the single market in a fit of pique, then those countries would consider their own agreements with the EU void. As one put it, if you punish Britain, we will punish you. The Remainers and Brussels want us to think we made a terrible mistake and the cards are all stacked in their favour. We didn't, and they're not. That's a Sun editorial explaining how silly it is even to suggest, back in October of last year, that we might have to leave the single market. And look, I'm not bored, but I appreciate that there's a temptation to move on to other things. You can't. It's the NHS next. The same people with very similar lies, supported by exactly the same billionaires. They're coming for the NHS. They're already there. If you let it go unchecked, you wave goodbye to everything we hold dear. Three things keep us safe and warm. The welfare state, the NHS, and supranational organisations like the EU or NATO, obsolete according to Donald Trump, or the United Nations. That's what keeps us safe and warm. But we've been so safe and so warm for so long, forgotten how to value it. Philip's in Guildford. Philip, what's going on?
Hello, yes, James, good morning to you.
Hello, mate.
No, the MPs ought to do their job. They ought to do their job, and I just despair of them. Their job is to vote according to what they think is the best interest of their constituents, and to hell with the consequences. If you asked the public in a referendum tomorrow if we could reinstate capital punishment, it would have been there years ago. They'd be hanging them in bunches in every village square. We know that. And the question has been put to Parliament, and they have said, no, it's the wrong thing, and we're not having it. And there isn't riots in the streets. We accept it because that's the constitutional role. In Lord Neuberger's majestic ruling today, when I heard him reading it out, he was in terms effectively telling MPs, I've upheld your sovereignty. This is your last roll of the dice. Now, do what you should do. That is what the ruling of the Supreme Court was. He's giving MPs, he's telling them in terms, you can prevent this.
But they won't. They won't. And listen, I'm not going to join you in criticising them, because it might sound a little bit prosaic, but they've got bills to pay.
They're minnows, James. They're minnows. They're living down to their reputation. Now, I think Jess Phillips has actually said that for that specific reason, she's going to vote. Now, if I'm misrepresenting her, I apologise, but I do believe that she had the cojones to say, and for the right reasons, that's what she will do. And face the consequences. And others have the opportunity. It's their last roll of the dice. And one more thing I want to say, James.
Of course.
This whole thing shows, beyond peradventure, that no future government must ever, 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 ever go down the road of referendum.
Oh, you hate democracy.
Not only has it got nothing to do with our parliamentary system, it is inimical to our parliamentary system.
No, we can have a referendum on what colour the stamps are. But no, you can. If it's a really simple binary question.
James?
Go on.
Where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line? They can ask you, because the danger here now is, James, we're going to have more and more referendums because the press want them. The press want.
And why did the press want them? I think, Philip, I can.
Whip up a frenzy.
No, mate, you're right. You're right. But not just that. Frenzy sell, of course, but also the interests of the owners are served at every turn.
Yes. Why do we bother with these blooming parliamentarians? They just get in our way. We can bypass them, and we can then order them by threats and malice and menace to do what we want via a referendum.
And if they get
with one bound, we were free.
If they get murdered by a terrorist who's fallen for the anti-immigration rhetoric that you publish every day, we'll only put the verdict on page 30. It's not a conspiracy, this. These are all facts. These are all statements. And have a look at this Sun editorial from October of last year. Ever since we voted for Brexit, there's been a non-stop series of threats from the likes of France and Germany. If we dare to take back control of our borders, they say they'll push us out of the single market. Right? That's the Sun. Pretending now that we all knew all along that we were going to leave the single market. And they're all at it. They're all pretending that we all knew all along. You play the tape on air of people saying the opposite, and they say, oh, yes, but the Remain side said that we were going to have to leave. Yet the Remain side were all liars, remember? Punting Project Fear. Everything they said was mistrusted. But all the Leave campaigners said we'd never have to leave the single market. Here's the Sun in October. Same editor, same columnists, same journalists that it's got now. Most of it is just hot air, since they export far more to us than we do to them. If they slapped tariffs on us and started a trade war, they'd be the main losers. This is an editorial on page 14 on October the 9th, 2016, laughing at the suggestion that we're going to have to leave the single market. And what are these people saying now? We knew all along we were going to have to leave the single market. The scale of the con is immense. And again, I'll say it, for the billionth time, I flipping well hope things go well. I really do. But even if they do go well, you don't stop calling out the con. Because if you stop calling out the con, next time, it's even bigger. That's the Sun. That's not me. That's not the Guardian. That's not the BBC or whatever sort of reputable media outlet you've decided to hate on today. That's the Sun, mocking the suggestion that we'd have to leave the single market. And now almost every pro-Leave caller I get says, oh, I knew all along we'd have to leave the single market. It's incredible. It's like watching half a country be hypnotised while the other half are going, wake up! Still snoring. Christina's in Chelsea. Christina, what would you like to say?
Oh, well, I'm just, I think we're all doomed. And last night, I was really...
Don't tell him your name, Pike!
No, I was really depressed last night. I knew we were on a hiding to nothing when I heard Farage telling a caller, having a chat about the fact that Trump had just lied a little bit. It was okay. He just, exaggerated the truth a little bit. And the caller was saying, yeah, that's it. He's not a lie. He just exaggerated the truth. It's
an alternative fact, Christina. It's not a lie. It's an alternative fact. Don't forget that, yes.
But, the thing is, it is the Emperor's new clothes. We're all sitting watching it, and I think it is too late, James, to turn it back.
Of course it is.
We've got Farage on the radio getting away with this conversation. Where on earth are we going now? There is no truth. I don't know how we stand up to this. I just don't. But the integrity of I will have so much respect for the people who vote against it if that's what they choose.
But they'll be voting. I don't know whether they will. You sort of presume at some point there'll be a pivot. The pendulum will start swinging back to people like you and me who think that lies are really bad. And that, politicians, though deeply flawed like all human beings are, should be absolutely hauled over the coals when they're busted with their pants down, lying like it's going out of fashion. But they're not. They get given radio shows. I don't know when that pendulum will start swinging back. But if it doesn't, then I can't insist that these MPs do the right thing. I don't know that I'd have the courage to do the right thing, to stand up and enact parliamentary democracy. I might be... Actually, I'd probably be okay because I'm used to it. But most of these people are not used to the levels of vitriol that is being directed at them. And they look at...
It will be vitriolic. It will be horrible. If you've ever stood up for something where you know you could end up in real trouble... I did this a little while ago. And the abuse I got for doing the right thing. But, I'd rather live... I wake up honest every day and live with truth and integrity. And I'd rather live that and be by myself than live a lie, which is what...
I'm not as noble as you, I'm afraid. I wish I would be. I aspire to be. Of course I do. But I think if the cards of my professional life had fallen differently, I would probably be on the payroll of one of the newspapers that I'm attacking now, because it's all I can do. It's journalism, and I've got kids and a house and a mortgage and bills, and that's why I haven't fallen out with any of my friends that still write for these newspapers. But when they tell you privately what they think of people like Kelvin MacKenzie, all you can do is put an arm around them and sympathise. Imagine having to share office space with him. Well, then again, actually, I think I've probably got a worse deal at the moment. It's 11:15. You don't get mad, don't get angry, get informed. Right? Simples. You get informed and then you get angry, that's fine. But I tell you what, the more informed you are, the more you realise that at the moment in this country, all the anger is directed at entirely the wrong people. And where's it led us? It's led us to a place where we will now see newspapers owned by non-domiciled billionaires encouraging their readers to attack verbally and politically, but these lines are thin in the minds of the fragile, to attack elected representatives if they dare to vote according to their own beliefs. So if an elected representative dares to vote in what they passionately and truly consider to be the best interests of their constituents, they're going to get crucified by the newspapers. Newspapers like The Sun, which as recently as last October was mocking and deriding the suggestion that we would have to leave the single market. That was last October. This is quite serious. We're British, we'll be okay. But this is pretty serious. Last October, they were mocking the idea that we'd have to leave the single market. Now, anybody who suggests that sounds like a bad idea, leaving the single market, is an enemy of the people or a traitor. It's almost a perfect circle. People use phrases like right-wing coup to describe what's going on. And when you look at the people responsible for where we've ended up, it's kind of hard to argue with that. I think it's happened largely by accident, but these forces are always waiting in the wings. Just like hardcore racists are always praying for trouble, praying for a refugee crisis, praying for an economic crisis, because only in those circumstances can you take frightened and dispossessed people and turn them into a mob. Donald Trump's done it. We've kind of seen something similar happen in this country. They're praying for it. Now you have... If you are unfortunate enough to encounter these social media accounts, every time there's a story of a sex offence or a sex crime in continental Europe, that you can feel the desire for the perpetrators to be brown, as if that makes the crime worse. You go on Twitter and it's everywhere. Everywhere. These far-right websites that have propelled Trump into the White House, that they are chomping at the bit. They almost celebrate. And then you've got the rest of the world who consider a sex crime to be disgusting, whether it's committed by the President of the United States of America or whether it's committed by a refugee. There's no difference. It's not locker room talk when one of them does it and the end of civilization as we know it when the other one does it. It's despicable. That's why women had to march at the weekend. And what are privileged white men in this country queuing up to do? Mock them. Josh is in Crystal Palace. Josh, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. You know what? I feel exactly the same as you do. I mean, it's almost surreal when you listen to what's going on. It's almost like, here's how I see it. The lies become the truth. It literally is a case.
Alternative facts.
Pardon?
Alternative facts. Yeah. Not lies, Josh, please.
Yeah, alternative facts. I mean, the funny thing about it is that you had Sadiq Khan. I heard the piece about Sadiq Khan, and the irony is I actually bumped into him when he won the mayoral election nomination for the Labour Party, and I actually bumped just by accident. And I said, "What you must do is stand up for your convictions and beliefs." And he nodded and he agreed and he smiled. And then I heard the piece from your colleague on the radio, and I thought, well, It wasn't committal. He didn't come out and say, I want my Labour MPs in London to vote to remain.
But they're not his MPs. He's not the leader of the Labour Party, and he's not even an MP.
Yeah, but he...
look, non-committal and ambiguous. I thought Charlotte Wright absolutely nailed his middle names there. But, also, he's a Muslim, Josh. And the kind of mob that I just mentioned to you will use that as a noose with which to hang him if he dares go against their billionaire boss's wishes on what we do to harm Britain next. I mean, he's in a tough situation. I also think he's probably playing a waiting game, but it's not his fight, this, and he follows what Parliament decides, so he might try and do his best to make sure that we, I don't know, have sort of half a parachute when we leap off this cliff as the capital city of the country. But in terms of what MPs should do, how do you think we've ended up at a place where if an MP votes according to their conscience, they're going to get crucified?
Because we have the British population, like it or not, has allowed itself, by hook or by crook, to be dominated by a small minority of billionaires who don't live in the country, who are insistent on controlling the media output. And you're a lone voice, really. You're becoming a shrinking voice in a large room.
Nothing's shrinking about me, mate.
Because what's happening, what we're seeing is that we used to have... I remember, I'm in the same age group as you, James. I'm young. And
bless you, Josh, bless you.
And I'm old. I'm young enough to remember when I used to open a newspaper as a very young man. My father was a Labour supporter. I remember being able to get different opinions from different newspapers. Now, if I open... not that I bother to read them, I can't get a different opinion.
No, you can't.
I hear the same thing in every different newspaper, bar one or two, and that is problematic. And
the Times is still strong, but you just occasionally you can see the days when Murdoch's picked up the phone. That's the problem with the Times, and that sums it up in a way, in that the Sun goes. God, I nearly swore then, but the Sun goes all the way in, goes absolutely in on the lies. I mean, literally at a pivot in a month, it'll go from saying we're never going to leave the single market, anyone who says we are is an idiot, to, well, we knew all along we were going to leave the single market, anybody who says otherwise is an idiot. And Murdoch knows that part of the country are going to swallow it. But he also knows that the more educated, shall we say, part of the country that is more likely to buy the Times, they're not going to swallow it. So he dresses it up differently for them. It's quite incredible. The scale of the con it's epic. It's immense.
That's the worst part of it. I can't see it improving until such time that people see that, for instance, we had the 300 million pounds a day going to the EU.
350 million pounds. I'm late for the news, actually. It's not on the side of a bus. That is actually true. Just briefly, though, a couple of people who've obviously tuned in late. A tweet from Neil saying, we were informed by Cameron, Osborne and Clegg that a vote to leave was a vote to leave the single market. Yes. And they were telling the truth, but you didn't vote for them. You voted for the people who said they were lying. I mean, these are the points at which you sort of wonder whether you need to buy a new pair of nutcrackers. It's 11:32. Well, curiouser and curiouser, said Alice. The Supreme Court has, confounded almost nobody by reinforcing the High Court's finding that in this country, since... my next guest will correct me on this. I go for 17th century, probably. Then you can't change the law without putting it through Parliament, putting it before Parliament. And the Supreme Court has confirmed this today. And yet still, controversy rages. Dominic Grieve is the former Attorney General, Conservative MP, of course, for Beaconsfield. Joins me on the line now. Can I start with quite a strange question, Dominic? What do you think the three judges that went the other way saw in this case that the others didn't?
Well, I think if I understood reading their judgment, they thought that the impact of triggering Article 50 was not sufficiently significant to be argued to undermine statute law, and that in those circumstances, therefore, it was a matter where the royal prerogative could still be used. But the other 8 members of the court disagreed, and I have to say, looking at it for myself, on the basis that Article 50 can't be revoked, it does seem to me that the consequence of triggering it could mean vast rafts of statute law disappearing. So for that reason, I think the majority got it right.
So the executive, the government, can't override statute law that Parliament has previously passed or enacted. That is a sort of foundation stone of our democracy.
That's the principle. It goes back even further than the 17th.
I knew it! Damn!
You can find it in text in the 15th century.
Good grief.
There's a man called Sir John Fortescue who said, "The king by his will cannot change the laws of the realm." It's absolutely crystal clear. And so it's a very well-established principle, and it's something very special to England, and ultimately, as a result of that, to the United Kingdom as a whole.
For now. With regard to what MPs do next, I did maybe a little bit alarmist, but it seems to me that we've reached a point when you look at some of the media coverage of these issues and some of the rabble-rousing undertaken by less responsible politicians than yourself. An MP who refuses to vote against what they consider to be their own constituents' best interests faces a form of media crucifixion now.
Well, they shouldn't. We are sent
but they
to
do.
Parliament. Well, they may be, but I mean, we have to stand up for what we believe in. As parliamentarians, we are sent to Westminster to exercise our independent judgment as to what's best for the country. We have to act in accordance with our conscience. But of course, it's also right to say that you don't disregard public opinion. It's one of the factors that you should take into account in coming to whatever decision you do on how you vote on any given issue. You also have to look at the widest national interest. Sometimes the widest national interest will be different from the specific thing on which you're voting. So these are all the things that we are sent to Westminster to deal with. It's our job to do it, and we face the consequence, I suppose, when we come to be re-elected. If people don't like what we've done, then they can vote us out of office. And if they do, they will vote us in again.
Which applies to MPs. Sadly, it doesn't necessarily apply to some of the more prominent Leave campaigners who, of course, don't sit in Westminster and therefore are kind of spared any form of accountability at the ballot box. But
that's quite true, yes.
Yes. What do you say to people who think that independent judgment has no place in a post-referendum ballot in Parliament?
I disagree with them entirely. Ultimately, as I say, we are a parliamentary representative democracy. Referendums are very important. And I should make clear, I think the referendum of the 23rd of June is extremely important, and the views expressed extremely important. But ultimately, if you want a working parliamentary democracy, parliamentarians have got to be able to vote in accordance with their consciences. If Parliament wishes to fetter its discretion, it can do it in the way it enacts legislation. But that's not the case here.
Remind me how your constituency voted.
My constituency voted to remain. One of my districts voted to leave, but I also represent about a third of another district, which actually voted very heavily to remain. So undoubtedly very split, but I think it's quite clear the overall vote was probably a remain vote. But I should make clear that that's not the overwhelming issue. We have to consider the
not for you, but not for you, perhaps.
Well, I think my approach to being a member of Parliament is the decisions I have to make have to take account the interests of people living in the north of Scotland, just as they have to take into account the interests of people living in my own constituency. It's true that I am sent as the representative for Beaconsfield, but it doesn't mean that my interests are solely confined to those of my constituents.
Dominic Grieve, you won't be surprised to learn that we don't subscribe to the school of thought on this programme that suggests the country has had enough of experts. I'm very grateful to you for sharing your expertise. It's 11:41, so again, and Mr. Grieve put it better than I could. We are effectively, if you're buying into this mob rule, this rabble, this deliberately ramped up rhetoric of will of the people, they have to do what they've been told, they have to do this, they have to do that, we're sending our elected representatives to Parliament to vote for what they believe will damage the country, and claiming that it's a victory for democracy. And that some of the loudest voices claiming that it's a victory for democracy are not accountable in any way. They're either MEPs who have essentially voted themselves into oblivion, while to a man and woman continuing to claim the salary and the expenses, and quite probably subsequently the pensions, but they're not accountable in any way, shape or form. And we're supposed to be cheering this? I wonder if anyone's going to be able to tell me why. Tim's in Epsom. Tim, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Tim.
First of all, excellent show as always. You know what? You are a miserable old devil.
Oh, you're telling me, mate. Seriously, I can't wait till mystery hour.
I've got to take issue with you.
Go on, then.
Take issue with you.
Yes.
Look upon what's happened today as a small step on a very long road. We have been proved right. The government cannot, or rather the legislation cannot run roughshod over us. That is a positive point. There are 63% of the electorate who did not vote to leave. 24% of the entire country did not vote to leave. We have a voice, and we need people like you not to tell everyone how dreadful and desperate it is. You know, I was out on my balcony about to jump off after I'd listened to you for an hour and a half.
You've got a balcony? What sort of a metropolitan elite out-of-touch Ramona are you?
You know, I nearly spilt my latte on my balcony, okay? But this is the point. The will of the people is the will of the decent people. And the decent, honest, reliable people will come to the conclusion, whether it's next week or next month or next year or in 5 years' time, that we cannot stand up for this disgraceful procedure, what has gone on, what we've all been sold as a pup. I thought you were coming here to provide an antidote to doom and gloom. You're just saying everything's awful, but if you sit around for long enough, things might get better again. The sun will come out tomorrow. If I listen to you,
yes.
If I listen to you, I'll jump off.
Nobody wants that. But here's the deal, and I appreciate what you're saying. If you stop calling out the con, the next con will be bigger.
Exactly.
So I'm going to carry on calling it out with your permission, but I'll try and put in more jokes. What do you call a fish with no eyes?
No idea.
No, that's a deer with no eyes.
I know.
Fish with no eyes is easier. It's 11:45. Perhaps time to redraw a question. I don't know. What question would you like me to ask? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I don't think that anyone can argue with what I've said today. You probably find some of it you can argue with, but if you're very much on the opposite side of this quotes debate end quotes, then you would probably also agree with me that we're going to threaten MPs who dare to vote according to their judgment and wisdom, such as it may be, instead of voting according to the referendum result in their constituency to start with. I mean, they'll be first in the firing line, won't they? People who are from constituencies that voted to leave, but then it'll extend beyond that. And that leaves Scotland out in the cold. Nicola Sturgeon's got her work cut out now. Government lost that bit of the case, but they didn't lose the bit that would have seen individual devolved parliaments voting also independently on the triggering of Article 50. And for me, as a student of politics and a fan of expertise, both of which, of course, are becoming increasingly unfashionable, I can't see how anyone can celebrate the fact that half a millennia of democratic accountability has now been torn up and thrown away. How many people listening to this programme now, probably in the group that will be tweeting and texting me rather than plucking up the courage to call in, but that's fine, I get that. How many people actually want their MP to vote according to the referendum result as opposed to according to the criteria under which our Parliament operates? Independent judgment was the phrase that Dominic Grieve employed. And public opinion. Public opinion is part of the process. But if it is all of the process, there's no point having a parliament. There's certainly no point having elected politicians. And then you move on to the unelected politicians, and I wonder whether you think the Lords is going to become real. Could you see the Lords kicking it back to the Commons? I can. Maybe not at this point, with the actual triggering of Article 50. I think we've got to trigger it. Well, then it's irrevocable. But the Lords is the place where people don't have to worry that much about their livelihoods and their future and their jobs. It's another one of those things that begins to make more sense as you get older. You think of democracy as such a binary thing when you're a kid. I remember as an A-level student debating furiously that we should abolish the House of Lords. But that's the point, isn't it, about an unelected chamber that draws upon experts from other fields, more so than at any other point in the history of the House of Lords, after the Labour Party closed down a lot of the hereditary seats and opened it up more to people who've proved themselves in business or proved themselves in charitable work or proved themselves in science or various other fields. So that's what the Lords is full of. The Lords is effectively full of experts. we know what experts think about Brexit. Almost every single one of them thinks it's the worst idea that we've ever had. So when it gets into the Lords and these people don't need to worry about losing the next election, they don't need to worry. I just wonder whether the debate will get even more interesting then. So I haven't really asked you a question, but the phone lines are open. Busy, but there's a couple clear. So if you want to grab one of them, you can. 0345 6060 973. How can anyone be comfortable with the dismantling of our democratic principles while simultaneously believing that we've enhanced them? That line from The Sun I read you from October, laughing at the suggestion that everybody thinks we're going to have to leave the single market, mocking the idea that we're going to have to leave the single market, and how quickly, once the truth has emerged, the truth that the other side was saying throughout the campaign but kept getting called liars and Project Fear, now that that's Project Fact, how are they still getting away with it? What is this appetite? What is this appetite that goes unmet? In other words, as we asked with Trump, what exactly are people celebrating? We know that we had the measures in place to control our borders, if that even means anything as a phrase. We know, I mean, anyone who's ever landed at Heathrow, unless you waltz straight through without showing your passport to anybody, you know that we can control our borders. Wage compression? Next to non-existent, as opposed, as related to immigration. Wage compression caused by billionaires running businesses, trousering epic dividends, buying yachts. Yeah, that happens. And where did they vote? The ones that own newspapers? It's clear. So it was all there. What are we supposed to be celebrating now? Oh, we're going to have a better trade deal. We've just left the biggest free market on the planet, or we're about to. How are we going to get a better deal than that? Oh, well, Donald Trump's going to look after us. He's just announced a new era of protectionism. Protectionism is the opposite of the globalism that Theresa May described. The precise and polar opposite. So what are we celebrating? David's in Brussels. David, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I'd like to say that basically for me, the whole key to this debate that you're talking about is the 9th of June 2015, which was when we passed the EU Referendum Act. Basically, I think it was about 540 to about 50 MPs. It was passed in favour, and they basically said, we're going to put this to the country. We put it to the country, and then the country have come out and said, we want to leave. And now you're saying that they should go back on the fact that they put it to the country and just make their own decision. What was the point in putting it to the country?
Did you hear Dominic Grieve? I mean, have you heard any of the last 2 hours?
Yes, I did.
Right.
I did. But that doesn't mean I have to agree with it.
No, you don't. You don't have to agree with what our parliament is. I mean, you can hold a view that it's something different from what it actually is, but that's an alternative fact. A parliamentary democracy.
You need to be flexible.
Yeah, and be, well, you don't want flexibility, do you?
Well, I do.
I do. I want flexibility. I want public opinion to be taken into account, but also knowledge, expertise, wisdom, experience. I want the people who've had a little look over the precipice and possibly changed their minds as a result to come back and talk to everybody else. You don't. You just want the blinkers on, heading straight for the cliff edge.
Referendum.
Pardon?
Did you vote in the referendum?
I did, yeah. I voted to remain because
why?
But why? Because I feared that there'd be a massive outbreak. Hang on, you just asked me a question. You just asked me a question.
Yes.
I feared that if the result went the other way, then regardless of what transpired politically, socially, we'd be moving into an era of race hate and toxic politics. And as you know, the Times reports today that the number of nurses and doctors being attacked in casualty has gone up exponentially, and they attribute it to the change in tone that Brexit has brought about. We're reporting on anti-Semitic attacks in North London. Well, you asked me a question.
It's a personal opinion. That's not a fact.
You asked me a question. It's happening, David.
No. You said they attribute it. That's not a fact. You've got to talk in facts. You're very interesting. You're always...
thank you very much. The fact that they have attributed it to Brexit is a fact, David.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that it is actually attributed to.
No. But I'm going to ask them. I'll tell you what, let's ask them what they think it's down to, and they'll tell us, and then you'll tell us why they're wrong.
Well, I think the only thing I really agree with you is when you say that people are furious, have their wool pulled over their eyes. One thing I do agree with you is definitely that, because you are, without that, the most furious person in the media.
You're joking, aren't you, mate? I'm cowed. The official figures show that there was more than one assault every day on doctors, nurses and other frontline staff in which their race or religion was specifically cited, David?
Yes, I admit that we do have a problem.
That's why I voted the way that I voted. And if I am furious, it's because people like you don't think that that's awful, which is great, because you're a white middle-aged bloke. So like me, I shouldn't care. Why do I care? I'm never going to be a victim of a racist or a religious attack. Well, actually, I suppose if Brendan Cox is listening today, and I know that he does, he would probably take issue with that observation. But you crack on, David. It's 11:58. Jonathan is in Ealing. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Big fan, first-time caller.
You're very welcome.
As well. My auntie says that she knows when you're in a bad mood. And I always say...
there's a Y in the day.
Well, sticking up for the left-wing listeners, I think.
It's not even left-wing, mate. I just stuck up for people who are getting punched in hospital waiting rooms because of their race or religion. That's not left-wing. That's human.
No, absolutely, and I'm with you. I spoke to your researcher before, and I said I voted to remain.
Snowflake.
Because of and because of the reasons that you just said. And to be honest, I make a point of not agreeing with Conservative MPs. But I thought Dominic Green kind of struck the points there. I mean, we effectively vote for MPs to go and. Well, they're the people that are working full time, aren't they? They're the people that are getting.
Yeah, but they've lost it. They've lost the support of people, and partly it's the journalists have had great fun mocking politicians for years, and it's our fault that they've ended up with so little respect that even when they say this is our job, let us do it, we say no, we know better. It's like marching into Casualty, pushing the doctors out of the way and saying, look, we've taken a vote on it and we think we've got to take his appendix out. That's where we are. I should have come to you a little later, Jonathan. I apologise. We're coming up to the 12 noon news. I'm going to carry on with this. I don't want to talk about anything else. It's incredible. It's like a sort of a hypnotic effect that's swept a swathe of the nation, and you keep showing them evidence that they've been hypnotised, and they keep getting cross with you. But I guess that's part of the hypnosis, isn't it? Hate on them, hate on the metropolitan elite and the media. Don't hate the liars, whatever you do. I'd forgotten about that story till the fellow from Brussels rang to tell us how awful Brussels is. Racist attacks on NHS staff have more than doubled in a year, with Brexit blamed for inflaming tensions in hospitals, reports The Times, owned, of course, by Rupert Murdoch. Back in October of 2016, The Sun, owned, of course, by Rupert Murdoch, argued very, very passionately in an editorial on page 14 that anyone suggesting we'd have to leave the single market as a byproduct of leaving the European Union was scaremongering and talking nonsense. Most of it, they wrote, is just hot air, since they export far more to us than we do to them. If they slapped tariffs on us and started a trade war, they'd be the main losers. What do you most want to see now? The letter that they sent to Nissan, making sure that they wouldn't jump ship when the facts started to emerge? What on earth did they promise Nissan? What did they promise Nissan? Or would you like to have a little look at Theresa May's conscience? Might contain very similar things. Theresa May, of course, arguing very, very persuasively with much knowledge and evidence that leaving the single market would be absolutely disastrous for Britain. But, hey, it's more important that she hangs on to the top job. Rio is in Leeds, which is geographically questionable, but nonetheless evidence of how far the LBC message is spreading. Rio, what would you like to say?
Cheers, James. I think unfortunately, one of the most damaging things that the referendum's done is kind of turn people on each other rather than, we've spoken about accountability, but holding politicians accountable for their actions and for the government for their action. What we're doing now is we're looking in the road and we're looking left, we're looking right, and we're going, which way did that person vote? Which way did that person vote? And unfortunately, that's one of the things that David Cameron's done to us. Score political capital.
No accountability for him either, is there? I mean, he's disappeared over the horizon. Why do you think that is? And in a way, maybe we need to ask people from the other sort of part of the argument why that is. But why so virulent, the division? It's simply, I mean, someone's just said they've seen on Facebook people saying that if Gina Miller gets killed, it'll be her own fault, and obviously... Yeah, well, I mean, our Facebook page is quite incredible at the moment. I'm amazed we get away with it. But why do you think that the people who have won are still so keen to threaten violence, so keen to spread hatred, and so furious?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. Firstly, I mean, like I say, we've been positioned against each other. We've been positioned into two camps. camps. We've been split down the middle, told, these guys are the fault.
But what are we supposed to disagree on? This is the thing I find fascinating. I spoke to David. I don't want to use him as an emblem. He said, why did you vote Remain? So I was really worried that this would validate racism. This would see, unapologetic fascists on the rise. They'd probably end up on air. And it's all come true. So why is there the... where's the mystery? Where's the argument? Where's the debate?
Unfortunately, I don't think I can answer that. I think we've been, a lot of what we consider dividing us is probably mythological to an extent. People look for scapegoats in every situation. It's very easy for people like us to look at, people who voted Leave and say, oh, it's just racist and small-minded.
No. Every racist I've ever met voted Leave, but I know loads and loads of people who voted Leave who aren't racist. Loads.
As do I, but now I find myself, like you do, I'm sure, in a situation where the debates you're having aren't based on anything tangible. I've been told a lot of times to just have faith in Britain during these negotiations. And I've said, do you mean have faith in Theresa May in the Conservative Party? Because they're the people that are actually in charge. It's not the population. And I suppose that's the point I'm going to make.
I didn't even know this, mate, but in a way it proves your point. Did you hear what the head of Nissan said in Davos last week at the World Economic Forum?
Which was...
Nissan will conduct a review of its Sunderland plant's competitiveness once the UK's future relationship with the EU is settled. So this is the problem. You see,
it was knocking about at the beginning of the referendum. It was.
No, I know, but this is since they pledged to turn it into the biggest. Since they doubled down, or allegedly doubled down, and pledged to turn it into one of the biggest car plants in the world. Carlos Ghosn, I think his name is pronounced, has sort of said that Brexit may raise concerns about the commitment of the company to the UK. That's after the pledge last October, around the time the Sun was writing that editorial. So even that story's moved on. But guess what? You don't know about that. I didn't know about that until one sent it to me, because it's in The Guardian. I never read The Guardian. You don't know about that if you're reading the Mail and the Sun, which of course are both owned by billionaires that want us to leave because workers' rights, union power, and if you like, collective responsibility.
And there goes another one of the tragedies of this, is that so many things move on while we're wrapped up in this debate about Brexit and whether we should leave or remain,
that's the answer. That's the answer to the first question I asked you. They have to keep them angry, because if they're not, if they stop being angry, they might notice stuff like this.
Absolutely, like this, like the NHS, like there was a recent a couple of weeks ago when a panel of Tories voted to keep sex and relationship education out of schools. On the grounds that it wouldn't provide enough fail-safes for religious groups to discriminate against homosexuals.
I need to double check that. I thought it was more of a filibuster. It wasn't that they voted against it. It was more that they had one of those weird manufactured debates to make sure that the vote was never reached.
As far as I was aware, in the Guardian, it said there was a sort of select group of 10 Tory MPs.
Yeah, filibustering, I think it's called, where you talk and talk and talk and talk, so it never gets to a vote. And again, I'd find myself asking why anybody would want to deny young children sexual education unless they were on the side of someone who's abusing a child and telling them that it's normal. But anyway, Rio, you're right. That's a distraction for another day. John is in Northern Ireland. There might be a Ray Liotta moment coming up here. John's in County Down. John, what's going on?
Hi, James. Yeah, I think for me the most disappointing, thing from today is how they've ignored the voice of Scotland and Northern Ireland with regards to the decision today. I think, particularly with the Northern Irish context, where we do have a hard physical border with the EU, it's been very ill-prepared. There hasn't been much thought into the process going forward. And we have a union of people, as we know, but 2 out of 4 parts of the union vote to remain but are ignored. I think we have an issue.
Ignored is a strong word. I understand why you're using it, but it is, the legal judgment, and I haven't had the time to read it all yet, obviously, because I came on air at 10 o'clock, but it would have made it clear that there was nothing in the original referendum that allowed for regional distinctions. It's a national ballot, and the nation is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It's not split in any way. So I think legally, I'd resist the urge to use the word ignore. But of course, in terms of how you feel, ignored is the only word that fits.
Yeah, and I think it points to the flaw in the referendum, that the actual ballot paper was too simplistic to understand the complexities of the region that is the United Kingdom. And, you know, we didn't know, I don't believe, exactly what we were voting for. Nobody knew. If they did, it was amazing. And so the issue is now that...
And if they said they were voting to leave the single market, then they were effectively voting against what they were being told by all of the leaders on their own side.
Yeah, I mean, it's just quite incredible. And it's incredible, too, that, I mean, there is this backlash against those that brought the argument forward this today, you know, particularly in terms of the fact that, you know, you want parliamentary control, you want the Constitution to look at, the courts to look at this and decide what's in the best interest of the British people moving forward. But now we'd rather prefer an unelected Prime Minister who apparently doesn't like questions makes this decision. So I think that, you know, there are issues.
He doesn't like the idea of leaving either, but I think any search for moral consistency there is, well, we're weeing in the wind on that one. John, look, you're one bloke in Northern Ireland, but in terms of what's going to happen to the land border, what's the kind of anecdotal received wisdom? What do you and most of your friends and colleagues, when you talk about it, what do you think is going to happen?
I think it might come down to a tagging system. I think that if they lose that free border, it will cause a lot of issues. That free movement across that border. It's been there before. You know, before we joined the EU, it's been there since I think 1922. So it's kind of, you know, but if guard post goes up, it is an issue. So I think there'll probably be a tagging of some kind, or whether or not there's some deal that takes into account the whole island of Ireland, and there's some controls when you come in from the south. I'm not too sure. I mean, to be fair, you know, Stormont's in a bit of a mess at the minute.
That's all the rage, mate. They're bang on trend. The bigger the mess, the more trendy they are, politically speaking. And you're right. I mean, there's an election on the way. Is that election going to be in any way informed by Brexit? Is it? I mean, is there any prospect of either side? And it would be Sinn Féin, I suppose, that did this, galvanising it as a vote for Sinn Féin is a vote for a united Ireland, or is that cliff edge still a distance off?
I think it will pop up as part of the debate. I think, you know, there's just so many things wrong with Northern Irish politics at the minute. I don't know if many of your listeners know about the RHI scandal, whereby if you spent £1 burning wood pellets, you got 160 back, which is just incredible. And, you know, there is the debt issues over here, there's the corruption, there's so many questions. I think Brexit's going to get lost in other debates. And that would be really sad for and my other worry for the North in terms of, you know, the redistribution of the Barnett formula, and in terms of funding that will go into things like research, education and sciences, will be minimised, and you might see a brain drain from the North in terms of educational talent, because if you look at our universities here, you know, we're going to be in competition with the big hitters in the UK like Cambridge and Oxford in terms of looking for national funding if we exit the EU, and there's no kind of distribution of funding between the UK and the Commission. So if we can't get the funding, you can't attract the best professors, the best research team. They're not being attracted. You might just see a decline in courses and a decline in people wanting to apply to go to universities in the North Mayo. So...
Well, we lost the line, John, but I hope you're still in touch enough to hear this tweet from Incorrigible FCA. It's callers like John who restore my faith in the intelligence and good sense of my fellow countrymen and women. It's 12:15. I've just had a studio visit by the House of Lords Media and Culture Committee, but luckily I'm behind the microphone, so I can't go and ask them what they will do if it does fall to the Lords to decide the ultimate fate of Article 50. We're discussing today the very, very sad dilution of parliamentary democracy, the fact that a curious combination of billionaire newspaper owners and self-serving, entirely unaccountable part-time politicians have created an environment in which elected parliamentarians will be crucified on the front pages of newspapers if they dare to exercise independent judgment, consider evidence, or even, God forbid, look to their consciences when voting to trigger or not to trigger Article 50. That's what we've done. I'm just wondering why anyone would celebrate that. You can tell me, although I've got to be honest with you, we haven't got a great deal of evidence for the defence as yet. 0345 60609 73 is the number that you need. Theo Usherwood is here to bring us up to date with some developments that have emerged since we came on air at 10 o'clock this morning.
James, we are starting now to get something of a clearer picture about what each of the opposition political parties are going to be demanding when, as we expect, Theresa May publishes a one-line bill setting out her plans to trigger Article 50 by the end of March. Now, I say a one-line bill because her spokesman was asked at the daily briefing in Westminster this morning whether she would commit to publishing a white paper, a full detail of what the Prime Minister plans to do following the triggering of Article 50. And the Prime Minister, this is the statement. The Prime Minister's speech last week very clearly set out the government's objectives. She was then, spokesman was then...
This was the speech about globalism and apple pie. Yeah.
Yes. So then the spokesman was pressed as to whether there would be further details. So it's now, and still no further commitment from them. So it's now looking like a one sentence. Then, of course, Jeremy Wright, the Attorney General, has in some circles been taking the flak, been blamed for presenting the government's case fully. The spokesman said that the Prime Minister had full confidence in Mr. Wright. But going back to those demands now, Labour's has published 5 points that where they will look to amend amend that one-line bill. The first is that the government publishes a detailed plan before Article 50 is triggered, along with robust impact assessments, i.e. what could happen once...
That's quite a powerful play, potentially.
Absolutely. And the second demand, government sticks to a number of key principles throughout the negotiations, including securing barrier-free access to the single market. So if Michel Barnier, the chief Brexit negotiator, was to say, well, you can have access to the single market, but it is going to cost you a 5% tariff, then Theresa May would be unable to accept that tariff under that demand from Labour. And then the next demand is that the legal status of EU citizens in the UK is resolved before negotiations begin. That's another key one because Theresa May has refused to do that because that's a big bargaining chip for the Prime Minister going in. Of course, there have been calls from all sides for the Prime Minister to act in this regard to secure the future of EU citizens living in the UK. Unable to do so because, of course, she needs to have that bargaining chip going into the negotiations.
And when they fail, when they don't get either of these things, they'll whip the Labour Party to vote against triggering Article 50? Is that the subtext here?
Well, the difficulty for the Labour Party is it's split between Jeremy Corbyn and probably 20 to 30 Labour MPs who support triggering Article 50 come what may. And
are they in very strong Leave constituencies or are they making decisions of conscience?
Those
or
are
both?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn has always been a man to stick to his principles, and he has been a long time opponent, hasn't he, of leaving, of staying within the European Union, and that's why there is that difference. Keir Starmer and his Brexit team are behind actually these particular demands rather than Mr Corbyn, the Labour leader himself.
So we've got a provisional wing of the Labour Party led by Keir Starmer.
Yes, and these demands have come from that.
And then you've got another one. You've got a kind of Praetorian Guard in waiting, which could be led by Sadiq Khan. And then you've got the party proper, which is ostensibly led by Jeremy Corbyn, who didn't get invited to Tom Watson's 50th birthday party last week.
Yeah, the Jeremy Corbyn wing is probably the smallest of all. But even so, it's looking at the parliamentary arithmetic. It's looking as if Theresa May will get her bill through the Commons with a majority of 200 or 300, more than 400 expected to vote for it, and then it will go on to the House of Lords. And what will they do? Of course, because this was not this Article 50 the vote was not contained within any manifesto, within any government manifesto. Certainly wasn't within David Cameron's. He said that he simply wanted to hold a referendum. The Parliament Act, which allows the government to ram through legislation, does not apply. So peers could potentially block it. Will they do so? We'll have to wait and see.
And it's usually just a holding tactic anyway, that it gets sent back and forth.
Yes, but it doesn't apply this time.
Does it not?
That's key. It doesn't apply this time. So Lords could have the final say. And then, of course, that opens up the question about from critics about the future of peers.
It's not as if unaccountable, unelected elites have played a key role in this whole process, is it? Happy days. 25 minutes after 12 is the time. Let's go to Barnet. Scott's there. What do you want to say, Scott?
Hi, yeah, I was just mentioning basically the fact that if we did this, what we've done now in Parliament with the Scottish referendum, where would we be with that?
You're going to have to run that by me again, Scott.
So regarding obviously what's happened today with the Scottish referendum, if there was they didn't like the vote and then they said, right, let's go through Parliament and decide what we're going to do.
But that's not even close to what's happened today.
True, but the point I'm trying to say is it's leading a very dangerous precedent that the MPs don't like the opinion and then change it.
But no MPs are involved in today's court case, or except I suppose the Attorney General representing the government.
Yeah, but would you say that every MP now is going to say, right, do we abide by the referendum vote, or do we actually think what's happened since will then change our opinion and we're now going to vote differently?
You've completely lost me. I think maybe bringing Scotland into it was a mistake. The Scottish referendum on independence was very, very different from the European Union referendum, not least because it's quite easy to explain what Scottish independence involves, and the complications come afterwards. Nobody really understood what leaving the European Union would involve, but they were too dissembling to admit that in the run-up to the vote, on both sides, actually.
True. Okay, well, more to my point is the fact that I just think it leaves a dangerous precedent that they're now basically going to have MPs.
But here's the thing, mate. Here's the thing. We've got three branches. We've got three. I mean, our state is determined by three branches. You've got the judiciary, which is the judges. You've got the executive, which is the government. And you've got the legislative, which is the parliament, right? And the idea is that they keep an eye on each other. None of them are allowed to ride roughshod over the other. So what Theresa May was trying to do was to essentially undo 5 centuries of parliamentary democracy, because it was, obviously in the 1500s, it was a king that tried to do it, but subsequent to the English Civil War, it will be a Prime Minister that tries to do it, to change a law that Parliament had passed without Parliament's permission. Now that is a definition of dictatorship. And what happens is, when a citizen of these islands complains and takes a case to court, to the judiciary decide whether or not the Crown, in this case the government, the executive, should be allowed to undo something that has been voted for by our sovereign parliament. And quite rightly, the judges have turned around and said there's no way that if Michael Foot was in charge, if Margaret Thatcher was in charge, if David Cameron or Neil Kinnock or Tony Blair or Gordon Brown or Michael Howard or William Hague, whoever was in charge, none of them should be allowed to change the law without asking Parliament's permission. And you think that's a bad thing?
No, okay, so then the argument would be then, what was the point of having the referendum? Shouldn't they have done it the other way around? Just voted on it first and then giving it to the people. It just seemed like, what was the point of having a referendum?
Well, the point of having the referendum was, in the very simplistic terms, was David Cameron's utterly botched attempt to sort of head off a racist rebellion from within his own benches. But he completely underestimated how quickly a lie can go around the world before the truth has even got its trousers on. That's the short answer to your question. The long answer, in the context of parliamentary democracy, accountability, and the relationship between the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary, is that it was only ever advisory. That's the bottom line. It was only ever advisory. So when Parliament, if it was functioning properly, if it was allowed to function in a proper, transparent, democratic way, all MPs would take public opinion into account when they go into the chamber, and they would also take into account the possibility of being held accountable and thrown out at the next election, and they would cast their vote accordingly. Which is what the judges have created. They've created an environment in which that can happen, in which politicians, parliamentarians, can vote according to their conscience.
Yeah, I just to me, it seems like why.
It's awful, isn't it? I know. I mean, who wants MPs using wisdom or conscience or knowledge or expertise or anything? We've had a flipping referendum.
MPs are great. No, I think the MPs are great, but I just think that we had a referendum and there's a lot of people that obviously didn't agree with it.
I think the simplest way to put it is that the stupidest person you know had a vote in that referendum, however they cast it, whether they voted it Remain or Leave, the people you know who struggle to do up their own shoelaces, all right, they had a vote in that referendum. That's the nature of a plebiscite. Everybody had a vote. Parliament, particularly on such a close result, should kind of put the national interest above the opinion of people who can't tie up their own shoelaces. But the Leave side are so terrified of the penny dropping or the wool falling from people's eyes, because that'll derail the whole project. And they're carving up the NHS next, make no mistake. They're so terrified of the wool falling from people's eyes that they have to keep this argument out there that this is some sort of betrayal of the people. It's not. This is parliamentary democracy in its ancient, purest, most beautiful form. And the fact that newspapers are queuing up to successfully persuade people like you that there's some sort of con job going on, when 6 months ago they were arguing the precise opposite, that's what should be making your alarm bells go off, mate.
Well, no, I agree with you. If this is my last point, I think the con job was basically done by the Leave lot, because if you think about it, as soon as it finished, they all quit. So I think that was the biggest con.
No, they all legged it. Of course they did, but that was always going to be the deal. It's the nature about rabble rousing. Once the rabble is fully roused, then you start trying to line your own pockets. Because if you're a proper politician, then you could get held accountable. It's 12:31, and it's probably time to really put cards on the table. You say, what are you actually celebrating? And it's a perception that life will be harder for foreign people and there might be fewer of them here. And I know lots of people cast their vote without having that thought in their mind. But now that pennies are dropping and banks are moving and pounds are plummeting and prices are rising, we know, really, how could you still be celebrating? And it is because this notion of identity, this notion of ethnicity is more important to many, many more people than most of us ever realised than anything else. Would you take a punch in the face if a foreigner got punched twice? Yeah, I'd do that. I'd take those odds. That's where we are now, in America and in Britain. It's kind of scary. David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, is due to address the House of Commons. As someone who is interested in the functioning of parliamentary democracy, I'm going to cross live to that. You, of course, are welcome to take a quick poll of everybody you're listening to the radio with, and you can prefer whatever it is they decide. I want to listen to the fellow that's going to have to do this, albeit that he did wish for this scenario to transpire. And I think that the Speaker is just introducing him now.
Government's response to today's judgment by the Supreme Court. This government is determined to deliver on the decision taken by the people of the United Kingdom in the referendum granted to them by this House to leave the European Union. So we will move swiftly to do just that. I can announce today that we will shortly introduce legislation allowing the government to move ahead with invoking Article 50, which starts the formal process of withdrawing from the European Union. Now, we received the lengthy 96-page judgment just a few hours ago, and government lawyers are assessing it carefully. But this will be a straightforward bill. It's not about whether or not the UK should leave the European Union. That decision has already been made by the people of the United Kingdom. We will work with colleagues in both houses to ensure this bill is passed in good time for us to invoke Article 50 by the end of March this year, as my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has set out. This timetable has already been supported by this House. Now let me go through the issues step by step. The government's priority following the European Union referendum has been to respect the outcome and to ensure it's delivered in the interests of the whole country. This House voted by 6-1 to put the decision in the hands of voters, and that bill passed the other place unopposed. So there can be no going back. The point of no return was passed on June 23rd last year. The government's also always been clear that we must leave by following the process set out in Article 50 of the Treaty on European Union. People want and expect us to get on with implementing the decision that was made. Now let me turn specifically to the process for invoking Article 50 now and the issues that arise from today's Supreme Court judgment. The government's view, in which we argued in both High Court and subsequently the Supreme Court, was it was constitutionally proper and lawful for the government to begin to give effect to the decision of the people by the use of prerogative powers to invoke Article 50. Today, the Supreme Court has agreed with the High Court's judgment that the prerogative power alone is insufficient to give notice under Article 50. And that legislation is required in order to provide the necessary authorisation for this step. In addition, the Supreme Court considered the roles of devolved legislatures in the process of triggering Article 50. On this, the Supreme Court ruled that, and I quote from the summary, relations with the EU and other foreign affairs matters are reserved to the United Kingdom government and Parliament, not to involved institutions. The Supreme Court summary goes on to say that devolved legislators do not have a veto on the UK's decision to withdraw from the European Union. Now, I'll come back to our collaboration with the devolved administrations later in this statement. The government's been giving careful thought to the steps that we would need to take in the event of the Supreme Court upholding the High Court's view. First of all, let me be clear that we believe in and value the independence of our judiciary, the foundation upon which the rule of law is built. So, of course, it goes without saying, we will respect this judgment. Second, as I've already made clear, this judgment does not change the fact that the UK will be leaving the European Union, and it's our job to deliver on the instruction the people of the UK have given us. Third, we will, within days, introduce legislation to give the government the legal power to trigger Article 50 and begin the formal process of withdrawal. It will be separate to the Great Repeal Bill that will be introduced later this year to repeal the European Communities Act 1972. This will be the most straightforward bill possible to give effect to the decision of the people and respect the Supreme Court's judgment. The purpose of this bill is simply to give the government the power to invoke Article 50 and begin the process of leaving the European Union. That's what the British people voted for, and it's what they would expect. Parliament will rightly scrutinise and debate this legislation, but I trust no one will seek to make it a vehicle for attempts to thwart the will of the people or frustrate or delay the process of exit from the European Union. Fourth, our timetable for invoking Article 50 by the end of March still stands. That timetable has given valuable certainty to citizens and businesses in the UK and across Europe. It's understood by our European partners and provides a framework for planning the negotiation ahead. This House itself backed that timetable by a majority of 373 in December. So we look forward to working closely with colleagues in Parliament to ensure that the legislation on Article 50 is passed in good time to allow us to invoke it by the end of March as planned. The government's fifth and final principle for responding to judgment is to continue to ensure that we deliver an exit that's in the best interests of the whole of the United Kingdom. The Supreme Court has ruled clearly in the government's favour on roles of devolved legislatures in invoking Article 50. But whilst this provides welcome clarity, it in no way diminishes our commitment to work closely with the people and administrations of Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland as we move forward with our withdrawal from the European Union. Let me conclude with a word on what today's judgment means to the UK and the nature of our democracy. I know that this case, on an issue of such importance which arouses strong views on all sides, has not been without controversy. But the court was asked a question. A proper, thorough and independent process was gone through, and it has given its answer in law. We're a law-abiding nation. Indeed, the UK is known the world over for the strength and independence of its judicial system. We will build on this and our many other strengths as we leave the European Union. We will once again be a fully independent, sovereign country free to make our own decisions. Our Prime Minister has already set out a comprehensive plan including our core negotiating objectives. She's been clear that we want a new, positive and constructive partnership for the UK and the EU, a partnership that will be good for the UK and good for the rest of Europe. Today, we are taking the necessary step to respect the Supreme Court's decision by announcing a bill. It will be up to this Parliament to respect the decision it entrusted to the people of the United Kingdom, a decision they took on the June 23rd. I commend this statement to the House.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for early sight of his statement. This is a good day for parliamentary sovereignty. The Supreme Court has ruled that we shall have a say in this House on the Article 50 issue. Given the issues involved, that is quite right, and the Prime Minister was wrong to have attempted to sideline Parliament in this process. This bill is only to be introduced because the Prime Minister has been ordered to do so. Now, I hope in the aftermath there won't be the attacks on our judges that there were when the High Court gave its ruling. And it's the duty of all of us to defend them if they do, and to do so quickly. And I hope the Secretary of State will join me in that endeavour. The question now moves on to the proper role of Parliament, and the Supreme Court said nothing about the particular form of legislation. But on issues as important as this, it'd be wrong for the government to try to minimise the role of Parliament or to seek to avoid amendments. And I ask the Secretary of State to confirm that he won't take that approach. This is a question of substance, not process. Last week, the Prime Minister committed herself to swapping the known benefits of single market membership and the customs union for the hoped-for benefits of a free trade agreement, with a fallback position of breaking our economic model. That is high risk. And there are big gaps, inconsistencies and unanswered questions in the Prime Minister's approach. Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister fails in her endeavour, the cost will be borne by families, working people and communities throughout the UK. The stakes are high, and the role of this House in holding the Prime Minister and the government to account throughout the process is crucial. Labour accepts and respects the referendum result and will not frustrate the process. But we will be seeking to lay amendments to ensure proper scrutiny and accountability throughout the process. That starts, Mr. Speaker, with a white paper or plan. A speech is not a white paper or plan, and we need something to hold the government to account throughout the process. Can't have a speech. Can't have a speech as the only basis for accountability for 2 years or more. That's the first step. There needs to be a reporting back procedure, and there needs to be a meaningful vote at the end of the exercise. The government should welcome such scrutiny, not try to resist it, because the end result would be better if scrutinised than it would otherwise be. I hope the Secretary of State will confirm that we will not seek to minimise scrutiny and accountability. I'll leave others to say about the devolved administrations, but I think whatever the court ruled, it is important that those interests are taken properly into account. I end with this, Mr. Speaker. What a waste of time and money. The High Court decision was 82 days ago. The Prime Minister could have accepted then to introduce a bill. We could have debated the issues, and I'd like the Secretary of State to lay out what the cost to the taxpayer have been of this appeal. Thank you.
Keir Starmer, quite statesmanlike, and of course it is a response to the Secretary of State for Brexit. He is the shadow Secretary of State for Brexit, so it is not a role which Jeremy Corbyn would have been expected to fulfil this morning. Where are we now, Theo Usherwood?
Well, David Davis saying that he wants to introduce a simple and straightforward bill. That points to what we've been discussing, simply a one-line bill giving Theresa May the authority, once it has been enacted, to trigger Article 50. You heard Keir Starmer there saying that he wanted the government to publish a white paper, referring back to Theresa May's speech. It couldn't simply be, the government simply couldn't base its negotiations on one speech. It actually had to set out in legislation what it planned to do, and that's what he was trying to do in terms of holding David Davis to account.
Because the vote to trigger Article 50 is a vote to start a very long and complicated process. The Labour Party is effectively asking what that process looks like before they vote to trigger it.
Right. So the Labour Party is asking to for the government to set down what it plans to do, what it plans to achieve. Of course, there was no mention in Theresa May's speech about immigration targets, for example, what it hopes to do and what it is prepared to give away in return for the achievements, in return for that new relationship with the European Union. Now, for Theresa May's part and for the government's part, it says that if it goes into those negotiations bound by certain red lines set down by Parliament as a result of legislation, as a result of this white paper, it can't possibly hope to get a good deal, because the likes of Michel Barnier, the chief Brexit negotiator, will say, well, actually, we can't give you, we're not going to give you this, and if we're not going to give you this, what are you going to do about it? Because Parliament has already set the parameters of what you can give away. And
although, you know, at risk of complicating things still further, it's sort of like a sort of compulsion that I have to bring facts to the table here. One of the very, very few things upon which Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump agreed was that this TTP deal that he nixed yesterday was unworkable. I think Hillary had said she would get rid of it as well. And one of the main platforms of criticism from the rational side of it, as opposed to the Donald Trump side of it, was that it had been too secretive. It had been conducted in too much secrecy, and that's why it has now been kicked into the long grass. So Theresa May learns from that experience. We must conduct everything in the utmost secrecy.
Theresa May doesn't want to create a dartboard of targets. I think that's the simplest way of describing it, is that she doesn't want to set down a series of targets that she has to meet, because she saw what happened to David Cameron last February when he went to the European Council and tried to secure a better deal in order to head head into the referendum with a strong hand, didn't get it, and ended up in a much weaker position heading into the referendum. So she doesn't want to end up in that situation and find herself with these with this set of targets that in April 2019, once that negotiation has been completed, she is held to account for. And that if she doesn't meet those targets, then everybody will turn around and say, well, you didn't get the best possible deal, we can't possibly accept it, and the whole of and the Brexit negotiations fall to bits. And that's the situation she doesn't want to find herself in. She wants as much flexibility as possible going into those negotiations. Now, you've of course put forward the Trans-Pacific Partnership with China. Okay, that's facts. But the tree. I'm just
TPP,
pushing.
not TTP. TPP.
Sounds
like having a wee in a tent. Yeah. Oh, come on, that's strong. I promised him I'd get more jokes in this hour, didn't I? TPP. There you go. Yes.
But that is just Theresa May's view, and the team in Number 10 want as much flexibility as possible, and they don't want to find themselves bound going into those negotiations, and that's why they're saying.
So we can't tell you what our plan is, but we've got a brilliant plan.
Yeah, we can't tell you what our plan is. We don't need to have. No, it's more. We don't necessarily need to have a brilliant.
Yes,
we don't necessarily need a brilliant
and
plan.
she has
It's
said
a
all
fluid
along,
moment.
we're not having a running commentary. Things change, events change. Well, what do you do when things change? I change my mind.
And she wants the ability to do that without everybody holding up her hands and saying, but you promised this.
So, just to sum up those two speeches, it is an irreversible withdrawal from the European Union.
David Davis said that.
But the Parliament's role is to ensure that we get the best deal for the national interest. But you're not allowed, once Article 50 has been triggered, to suggest that that deal is worse than what we had before. It's only worse than the other things we could have got instead.
And you fall into, as David Davis said in the opening, at the very opening of his remarks, he said he didn't want to see MPs use this vote in Parliament as a way of thwarting the will of the British people. Somehow
this phrase is catching on, isn't it? It's like the 350 million on the side of the bus.
A vehicle to stop dissent. And of course, critics might say, you might say, James, well, hang on a moment, don't confuse dissent with disloyalty.
Yeah, well, I would, but then again...
And Keir Starmer was saying the same thing.
What do I know? Theo Usherwood, many thanks indeed. Time now, 12:48, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. You heard earlier from David Green, the lawyer for one of the claimants in this Article 50 case that today saw the Supreme Court uphold the finding of the High Court, and you heard him explain why his client had elected to step away from the spotlight, so to speak, in really the most distinctly un-British of terms. The abuse and the threats and the, insults that they've been forced to endure are, I think, a shame upon the nation. The other claimant, of course, Gina Miller, has elected not to step away from the spotlight, not to put her head below the parapet, even though she would have been completely free to do so once the wheels of justice had begun to turn, and she joins me on the line now. Do you return now to relative obscurity, Gina Miller?
Hello. I hope I don't, in that I'm a very activist lobbyist when it comes to a fight of the injustices in the world of investments and charity, which I've been doing for over a decade. So I will carry on doing that work.
Have you any regrets over what's transpired during the last few months?
I'm regretful that the government chose to appeal in October, because originally the plan was that we would go in October. If we won, that would be the end of it. So I'm regretful that I've had to go through even more months of abuse, not of my choosing. And it was interesting when you were saying that I could have stepped down and not be in the limelight. But on the 19th of July, when Lord Leveson chose me as the lead claimant, my choice then was to either run away and not be the lead claimant and drop the case, or to carry on with the baton. And I've never been someone to run away from a fight on what I believe is right. So I chose to run with it.
It's a hollow victory of sorts. I suppose technically it has been successful, but in the context of attempting to prevent any form of Brexit, I know that was never your goal. It was never your aim, but nothing's really going to change as a result of this.
Oh, this is the biggest celebration. This is the biggest victory, because if you put Brexit aside, This is a victory for our constitution and for every one of us to be glad that MPs can be consulted before our rights can be taken away. Governments cannot behave like despots. They cannot shut themselves away in a room, use a royal prerogative and decide our futures without consulting Parliament. So it is actually the biggest victory for our constitution and for our country.
And yet so many people see it as the opposite. Have you been surprised not just by the nature of the vitriol, but by the scale of the ignorance? Because what you've just explained is to many people listening to this programme, absolutely crystal clear, and yet some are determined to see evidence of treason in there, or worse. I mean, you've managed to retain your sense of humour. I'm not sure everybody would have done. You cannot have seen this coming, Gina Miller.
Oh, I absolutely. The two things I never saw coming is, one, I thought that once I'd decided that I would be the lead claimant and I'd go ahead, that lots of other people would stand beside me, behind me, would join in, and for the 7 months I look around, there's been no one there. So that's been a surprise to me.
Do you know, I didn't personally realise that was on the cards.
But no, I meant from a point of view of people in position who could have actually stood up and said, well, this is a legitimate question.
Yes, of course.
And secondly, I didn't anticipate that as a ethnic woman that I'd get the abuse that was personal to me. I do believe that if I was a white male, I wouldn't have endured what I've endured.
A different tone, perhaps a different scale, but there still would have been much to endure. Your crime in the minds of these people was to be born in British Guyana. You'd think they might be able to put two and two together and work out from that what your nationality is.
But it's actually not to do with who brought this case. It was about the case. And
no, but the abuse is.
No. The abuse is definitely been very personal, but very few people, including quite a few politicians, have actually bothered to read the case.
Yeah. And that is, I suppose, all the more reason to ensure that the proper workings of parliamentary democracy are enforced, even when some of the residents of that parliament don't understand the importance of what you've been doing. Briefly, and I'm sorry to labour this point, but I do think it's possibly the only alarm bell that is going to break through to some people. Just give us a flavour of the sort of things that you and your family have had to endure.
Well, I've been told that as a coloured woman, I'm not even human, I'm a primate, so I should be hunted and have my head mounted. There were Facebook campaigns it's daytime radio to sort of do horrible sexual acts to me. Threats that I should watch my family be killed and burnt. I should be the second Joe Cox. And this perception that's on social media, it's keyboard warriors. These are people who have taken the time to address an envelope, put a first-class stamp on, walk down the street, put it in a postbox. This is premeditated. This is not just keyboard warriors.
Gina Miller, many thanks on many, many levels, and it seems only right to remind you, after hearing that Nigel Farage will be on this radio station later today. You've been listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We'll do it all again tomorrow morning from 10. The world is changing. Nobody knows how, but everyone with their eyes open suspects it may not be for the better.